call to order the October 6th meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council. And if you'd all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Francisco? Hotchkiss?
Here.
Murillo?
Here.
Rouse?
Here.
White? Here. Mayor Pro Tempore Hart?
Here. Mr. Casey, I believe we have a ceremonial item.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Each month we like to recognize employees for achieving certain milestones of service to the city of Santa Barbara. So at this time, I'd like to read some of those names into the record. And we have one employee here to receive his pin in person. With 5 years of service, Cynthia Cornett, Parking Enforcement Officer with the Police Department. Edward Montejano, Maintenance Worker 2, Public Works Department. And Amber Workman, Recreation Coordinator, Parks and Recreation Department. With 10 years of service, Laura Borden, Litigation Paralegal, City Attorney's Office. Jennifer Hopwood, a buyer with the Finance Department. Brenda Nielsen, Administrative Clerical Supervisor, Community Development Department. Douglas Klug, Police Officer, the Police Department. Thomas Dietz, Maintenance Supervisor 2 with the Waterfront Department. With 15 years of service, but after the past year, it may have felt like 30, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, Public Works Department. And with 25 years of service, Geronimo Reyes, Police Officer with the Police Department, and here to receive his pin in person, Edwin McGregor, Wastewater Treatment Plant Operator 2 with the Public Works Department.
Mr. McGregor, could you please come up to the podium and I'll present you with your certificate. We'd like to recognize you for your incredible contributions to the city of Santa Barbara, 25 years of service, a tremendous career. We're very grateful for your efforts. There's a couple things I'd like to say. You began work with the city of Santa Barbara on October 15th, 1990 as a wastewater treatment plant operator in training with the Public Works Resources Division. You advanced to a wastewater treatment operator 3 position at El Estero Wastewater Treatment Plant. You followed the procedures and works with lead staff to troubleshoot problems and does a great job watching out for potential hazards and follows safety procedures for operations. You've been very helpful in assisting during the training of new operators in training and also very responsible to both written and verbal instructions. You volunteered to change your shift to help accommodate other workers, which is really much appreciated by, I know, all your colleagues here today. And with very little advance notice, you've arrived early to work to cover crew shortages. You've received the Employee of the Month Award for extra efforts during the Gap fire and worked overtime to assist during the emergency keeping wastewater systems operating. It's my pleasure to honor you today for your 25 years of service to the city of Santa Barbara and congratulate you again for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, council members. Santa Barbara is a very special place, and I'm very proud to be a civil servant, to have served the city, and it's a very special moment to have all of my colleagues and my team here to support me. So I humbly thank you for this award. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Mayor Pro Tem. Can I say something?
Sure. We'll go out of the line, but you have some special expertise in this area.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I have had the privilege of working with Ed McGregor for 18 years on shift, and he's always been a very calm, moderating influence. Both Shane Starr and myself worked with Ed probably at least 18 years. We were both type AA operators, and Ed provided the balance, and it was great. And I'm still working with Ed, but we're on different shifts, same hours of the week, essentially. One thing, this shows Ed on, let's see, it was probably November 2004 Ed was operating the plant. I got pulled off. We had our first heavy rain, which turned out to be an El Nino year. That 2005 January is when they had the La Conchita tragedy. Gibraltar also came up, filled and spilled 30 feet overnight. Okay, the rain started in November, and Ed walks in the door, and we were doing the DOL, daily operations log, where you take meter readings, and it's mostly digitalized today. But it was just pouring cats and dogs. I was having problems with the finding all the sample instruments and whatever for the Creeks Week. The Creek Division staff had just started sampling. Okay, I'm soaked, and here Ed walks in the door in a slicker, and he takes the paper DOL and just wrings it out. And that's just a little indicator of some of the conditions you have to work in. And Ed did it with very good humor, and it's been great working with him. And hopefully a few more months I'll continue to be working with him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for making that personal. Appreciate that. Mr. Casey, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Then we have public comment. I think I have 3 speakers. Daniel Seymour, followed by Wayne Scholes. Mr. Seymour.
Well, thank you for your time. I live on Las Positas Road, and I travel down to Cal State Channel Islands, where I teach, every few days, driving back and forth, almost in a time-lapse photography kind of way. The disturbing and continuous growth of graffiti. And it sort of goes against what this special place is. And I just, I have a thumb drive. I don't normally do this. I risked my life this morning, and I have a class shortly, and just took some pictures between, and maybe some of you already know this, and I know a lot of it always comes down to short staff. But between Las Positas and Carrillo, I counted more than 50 separate graffiti symbols. And they're big and bold and wonderful, and I congratulate the artists on their artistic work, but I don't think it reflects the specialness of Santa Barbara. And if you go online, there are a lot of best practices. I just took a moment this morning, and I looked at best practices in terms of graffiti removal, and there's really quite a long list that seems to work. And I hate to say this, it almost seems as if we're in the worst practice scenario, because what you don't do is once every 3 months paint over the wall, which apparently gives them a nice fresh canvas to work on, and that's exactly what I've seen over the last several years of having to watch this. We wait and it fills up, and then we paint it over, and then they start all over again. So I know this is probably a resource problem, but it seems like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result. So I would ask, for those of you who do believe that this is a special place, that we try to figure out perhaps a new set of strategies and tactics to address this problem, because I think it doesn't speak well of who we are here.
Thank you, Mr. Seymour. I appreciate that. If you have locations specifically that you'd like to identify to our staff, that would help us. And if you could just go to the city council offices, the staff there can print that out for you, I think, and make that available to us. So,
but please understand, it's not about the locations. It's about the strategies.
Exactly. We do have staff that's aimed at eradicating that, but I think you're exactly right. It is a resource issue. They try to get to things as fast as possible. Ideally, we get to them the next day, but I think in this instance, there's probably a combination of public and private property, probably Caltrans property, so it is a much more complicated issue. But we take it seriously, and if you want to share those locations, Assistant City Administrator is right there in the back of the room to help you.
Sure. Again, I just have to say there are different ways of doing things other than simply resources and painting over the walls. You plant things. There are many other ways to do this than to simply, it's a bit of a cop-out to simply say it's a resource problem. It's a strategy
problem. Trying to limit the time and conversation because this is public comment, but otherwise.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Hotchkiss.
The number you mentioned, 50, was that on 101 between Las Positas and Carrillo?
Yeah, just there. But I look over on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so you know the 101 is, we can't touch that. That's all Caltrans. But on the streets, we can do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Scholes, followed by Phil Walker.
I want to bring the public's attention to the headline, Santa Barbara News Press. Officers Union goes after police chief. And I see some people up there shaking their head, but I've never heard them speak out. There's a lot of chickens running around this city that have covered up corruption, arrest of people who have been speaking up. The officers that are doing this are risking their career because of the retaliation that's happened against them. I was arrested on false charge by this same rat in 2008. I proved I was innocent, and nobody in this city did a thing to this person. There's going to be a book coming out next year on corruption and cover-up in Santa Barbara, and I guarantee there's going to be a lot of people that wish they'd never worked for this city. The previous administrator, the previous attorney, the current city administrator, the current attorney, the district attorney, the mayor, certain officers in the police force, and the chief of police. Now, every single person that works from the city is a public servant. If it gets proven, and I know it will, because I had people that were ready to testify in federal court before the city made a deal, FBI made a deal with the chief. I've got all of these documents. It's been proven. I work with the Justice Department, and I'm going to contact them again. There needs to be a class action lawsuit, and I encourage every single person that has had injustice done to them by these people, speak up. I also encourage every single officer to speak up. They do deserve a new police station, but I have stood here time and time again and said the public will not vote for a new police station as long as that little rat, Cam Sanchez, is the chief of police. You have been harboring somebody who has been violating the public's rights and violating the Constitution. It's about time somebody has some guts. And I can say, I also want to tell the public, the only people I think sitting up there that do is Frank Hotchkiss and Randy Rouse, because they're the ones that led the efforts to get State Street cleaned up. We are sick and tired of everybody not listening to the public. And every single person that's afraid to speak up during this election should be voted out, or the media should force them by hounding them. What is your opinion of this issue? It's time to get your head out of the sand and face the facts.
Thank you, Mr. Scholes. Appreciate that. Phil Walker, followed by Cruzito Cruz.
Good afternoon again, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. I had occasion again to walk into the Green Valley development at the Punta Gorda Bridge there, and it was sort of got some bad rep last week in council, but the construction manager, Bill, is very accommodating, and he says, you know, it is what it is, and it will be what it will be. And I was very impressed with, in comparison with that development, than what used to be there, because I've been around a long time, and I remember at the old deluxe trailer park that this development is replacing, it was plain bad. You had trailers falling apart, you had raw sewage running on the ground, and it's really amazing if you get a down gradient tsunami or an up gradient tsunami slop over from the Sycamore Creek there, that I hopefully has been handled very well with the development of the new channel and bridge. They've got an 8-inch perimeter foundation on these units with a lot of steel in them, so they're going to stay, not trailers sitting on the ground or jack stands or speed blocks. So, you know, give the development a chance. The only concern I see is with parking, which is a premium in that whole area, and I've lived it down there. And you know, give the development a chance, please. And you know, if there had been a little bit more publicity and interaction between the state Caltrans, the owners of the property, and the city, it probably would have worked out a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cruz.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Hart, council members, councilwomen. Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Soy Crucito Herrera Cruz. Estoy corriendo para el distrito número 1 aquí en la ciudad de Santa Bárbara para las elecciones municipales del 3 de noviembre del 2015. My name is Crucito Herrera Cruz. I am running in District 1 for the municipal elections this November 3rd, 2015. My three-point plan was always from the elections previously that I ran in, 9, 11, 13, 15, to talk about adult youth services, senior services to be improved, to improve the public infrastructure, talking about affordable housing, talking about the street index within our Santa Barbara cities, talking about the electricity lines going underground, making it more modern. Looking at the different, now we have an opportunity with districts to create new plans for the Mesa District Plan, the West Side District Plan, the East Side District Plan of action to create issues, organic issues, to create solutions and identify those issues. And we'll be happy when implemented, the surrounding 4, 5, 6 districts get implemented in 2017. Because it'll create the issues, to create the stakeholders, to create those solutions within their neighborhoods. So that'll create accountability and transparency. Por favor, ya cuando escuchen aquí el foro, por favor entiendan que tenemos que votar. Uno tiene que elegir su voto para ser representado en el concejal. O si no tenemos concejales que escuchan nuestras voces, no escuchan nuestras representaciones que necesitamos, entonces nunca vamos a ganar o a lograr algo bonito. I'm just saying we have to participate, we have to vote to be involved, because if we have representatives that don't hear us, don't implement issues, nothing is ever going to get done. So it's critical.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Madam Clerk, could you please read the items on the consent calendar?
Item number 8, TEFRA, Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act hearing for 13 to 21 South Soledad, Pearl Gardens, and 211 to 221 Sycamore Lane, Sycamore Gardens, debt issuance. Recommendation that council hold a public hearing and adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the City Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving the incurring of a tax-exempt obligation by the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara for the purpose of providing financing for the acquisition and rehabilitation of Pearl Gardens and Sycamore Gardens multifamily rental housing facilities.
And then, Mr. Hotchkiss, you wanted to pull item number 3 off for some questions?
Correct, please, just for discussion.
Any other items to take off consent? Okay. Item 3 then. Madam Clerk, could you please read that one?
The reason I wanted to pull this off is that I have great admiration for Transition House, and these numbers I think are significant, but we need some flesh on the bones, if I could ask. So if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Bowski.
And if we could just briefly read the item so folks know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Home tenant-based rental assistance grant to Transition House.
Thank you. Ms. Bowski?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Hart and council members, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about our program. We are here today asking for tenant-based rental assistance from the city. We have received tenant-based rental assistance in the past. Basically, what it allows us the opportunity to do is to move people that are in our emergency shelter into housing more quickly by giving them assistance with security deposits and short-term rental assistance while they get back on their feet. So, Councilmember Hotchkiss, did you have specific questions about the numbers that we provided?
I wanted to point out that this assistance is, I think, reimbursed by and large, is it not? And people are encouraged to pay back whatever assistance you offer.
That is not required, and at this time it would be difficult to manage that, especially if it's a security deposit, because the hope is they're going to get into an apartment and stay there, so they wouldn't.
Process of helping people get back on their feet. What's your success rate, would you say?
So the success rate for this program has been pretty good. We, with this particular funding source from the city, when I submitted our request for additional funding, we had served actually 36 households. It's gone up since that date, which was August 15th, to 44 households. But as of the number of 36 households, we had an 89% retention rate in housing. So we consider that a very successful program.
Yeah, I would too. Is that over a year period?
Yes.
And is that families or just mothers and children?
It can be families or single individuals. It's primarily families. Those are our constituents in our emergency shelter. It might be a single dad with kids. It might be a two-parent family or a single mom with kids. We have assisted a few single individuals as well that were referrals.
Thank you. Do I understand that there's a limit on how long somebody can be at the shelter?
There is a limit in our program. Technically, it's usually up to 6 months. We try to limit stays, though, or get people through the system in 3 to 4 months. But that can be difficult if they don't have any employment and no resources. Of course, if they're in a homeless shelter, they probably have no savings. So they need enough time to get employed and to save enough money to have a security deposit and first month's rent, unless they qualify for this assistance, and then they don't have to have as much saved.
Am I right in saying that more than half of the residents there are children?
Yes. In our emergency shelter for families with children, about 60% are under the age of 18.
And they still go to school? You get them to school every day?
Oh, yeah. School and summer camp and daycare if they're not school age, so their parents can work.
Well, thank you very much for all that you do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Any
you,
other
Ms.
questions?
Barshi. Appreciate all the work that you do with Transition House.
Yeah.
That's an incredible service provider in the community.
Thank you. We appreciate the city's support.
Thank you. Is there a motion for the consent calendar? Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No. Abstain. Measure passes. Next item on the agenda is the presentation regarding El Nino preparedness. Waiting on Chief McElroy. There he is.
Good
right
afternoon,
there.
Mayor
Thanks,
Pro Tem
Ms.
Hart and council members. Chief McElroy is on his way in, and
Came up quicker than I thought.
We've got the whole team here. Good. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Hart and Council. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Hart and Council. I'm here today and I think it's very important to show that I'm part of a team that's been tackling preparedness for El Nino. Right here we have Eric Bolt from the National Weather Service, Liliana Encinas from our Public Education Division of the Fire Department, Joe Pori Fire Marshal, Lee Waldron, Assistant Fire Chief, Yolanda McGlinchey from our Office of Emergency Services, Rebecca Bjork, and also Scott Reedman, Hazel Johns, and Jill Zachary from various departments. So one of the things that we've learned through the past several events, whether they're fire or flood, is that we respond best to these type of situations is if we take a team approach and we plan together. So that's we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But first off, I'd like to introduce Eric Bolt from the National Weather Service, who's going to tell you a little bit about what we're looking at for El Nino this year.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I was going to lead you through kind of a idea about what El Nino is and some of the predictions we're looking at. So, again, my name is Eric Bolt. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist from the National Weather Service in Oxnard. So, a little bit too fast. There you go. I wanted to start out with this one is that the current conditions, most people don't realize we've been in El Nino since March. Okay, it just happened that it didn't develop in time to give us any benefit last winter. So since March, the signal of El Nino has strengthened and it continues to strengthen. So at this point, there's a greater than 95% chance that we're going to have an El Nino this winter. That leaves 5% chance of not having El Nino, so very slim. And then a group of forecasters and meteorologists, experts get together and they make a decision on the strength. And right now we're expecting a strong category. Okay. So I want to give you an idea of what's normal. On the left side of the screen is basically Australia, and on the right side is South America. This is the tropics we're talking about. El Nino happens in the tropics. It doesn't come to California. We don't get El Nino storms. The change is in the tropics. So what happens, the trade winds typically blow across the ocean from east to west, and you push a lot of ocean, even thicker, deeper water to the western Pacific Ocean. That's where you get the warming happening in the Western Pacific. That's the energy that you need to fuel the atmosphere for storms. This is the typical pattern. Okay? During El Nino, basically you're shifting those trade winds to the east, or you're shifting the winds, reversing direction. That pushes the warming eastward to the eastern Pacific. When you do that, you're changing the circulation going on in the atmosphere. That's the energy that's driving storms. We've seen a lot of tropical cyclones in the Pacific, which is typical during an El Nino, and that's that change we're looking at. So warmer water and the winds shifting across the eastern Pacific.
Sorry if I can interrupt just a sec. Out of curiosity, when you say warmer water, 2 or 3 degrees or more?
This chart right here, basically the reds are 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above normal. So you're talking about 5, 6, 7 degrees in Fahrenheit. It's not a big change, but it's big enough to cause this signal. The black box there is basically the area they're monitoring closely in the tropics. Again, that's where we want to see the warming occurring, and that's what's happened over the summer into late August. The red color area you see there off the California coast in the North Pacific is also unusual. It has a definition called the blob, if you've heard of that in the news. That's how it's been coined.
That's the scientific word for it.
That's the scientific word.
Okay.
That's that high pressure area that's been blocking our storm systems from reaching the West Coast for years. It tends to weaken storms. They move around it. You don't get the upwelling and the mixing of the ocean. So the ocean is basically warmed. Okay? That's never been there in the past during strong El Niños, some of the strongest ones of 1982, 83, 1997, 98. So this is a little unusual, a little unknown territory as far as what that temperature reflecting there in the eastern Pacific will do. Right now it's 2.4 degrees Celsius, which is very high. 1.5 degrees Celsius is considered a strong category. So we're way above that right now.
Has that weather or that water temperature condition off the California coast been in place without an El Nino, and has that influenced weather?
That's what's been basically blocking our storms.
Right, but has there been other historical times when this has been measured as a phenomenon?
Not to my knowledge, not to this level. All the warming we have experienced off our coast here in the last couple of years has been basically due to that and not El Nino. Another thing I wanted to get people to understand is that El Nino is just not the sea surface, it's depth of the ocean. So this is a long-term climate process that takes many months and years to happen. So this is looking down basically a cross-section of the tropics again, down to 1,500 feet in depth. And all that red and orange is basically warmer temperatures than normal. The blue in the western Pacific is what's happening during an El Nino. The western is cooling, the eastern is warming. Okay. A lot of talk about how strong this year's El Nino will be. The brown highest line on that chart is 1997-98, and the green is 1982-83. The two strongest El Ninos measured since they started measuring for El Nino, which was back in 1950. So since then, there's been 6 strong category El Ninos. Those are the two strongest. That's where we're at currently in the red line. Pretty much in second place all time for the strongest signal right now. You can see how it kind of tapers off in the springtime, and this is the forecast. A lot of different computer models that they basically plot up there, and they all have different scenarios. But the consensus is the bright yellow line. Basically, it stays in a very strong category. 2.3 degrees Celsius anomaly was the strong signal from 1997-98. This one is every bit as strong in the prediction for this winter. And the typical scenario is it weakens throughout the spring and summer when we get out of our rainy season. Okay. So people want to know how much rain is associated with strong El Ninos. I wish I had the golden answer for you, but we can look back. This is downtown Los Angeles for the 6 strongest events. The one on the right is our current scenario. So every past strong event has been much above normal precipitation in Southwest California. I put the 4 preceding years on there just to give you an idea of what the precipitation totals were leading up to the strong El Nino. So we can see how much of a deficit we have been in the last 4 years. But most of the strongest ones, again, 82, 83, 97, 98, have been over 30 inches for downtown Los Angeles, and they average about 15. Another way of looking at it here is Paso Robles to our north. As you go northward, the El Nino signature tends to go downhill. So you can see here some of the strong years, Paso Robles did not fare as well, below normal precipitation. Okay. And looking statewide, this is the result of those 6 strong El Nino categories going back. There's one there in the 50s, pretty much every 10 years. You can see how Northern California, click on that, those 2 events there, not so good, precipitation-wise below normal. And that tended to happen in parts of Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, and northward. That's significant. You can see the 2 strongest events on the lower left and lower right, the whole state benefited. So if we do stay in that scenario, a very strong category, we might want to assume that most of the state's going to see beneficial precipitation and snowfall. The problem with the northern areas not receiving as much rainfall, that's where our biggest water storage and reservoirs are. Something to keep in mind about our current drought situation. So that would be a problem if we don't pan out so well in northern parts. So these are the official predictions across the country that our national centers put together. It's based on historical past. This is the January through March time frame. So where you have the green would be a higher than normal rainfall pattern for those 3 months, but you can see how it does taper off as you go north into California. Temperature-wise, we've been above normal for years, and trends are still going that direction. El Nino is a warm phenomena, okay? So our storms are going to be coming more out of the southwest. You're going to have a little higher snow level and a milder winter overall, and that's pretty much the prediction here. So some of the conclusions, every time we talk about El Nino, you are tilting the odds of above normal precipitation. Since we are talking about a strong, that would be even higher odds of that happening. We want to emphasize, one, El Nino is not going to end the drought. We've got 30 to 40 inches of deficit over the last 4 years. We're not going to make all that up in one winter. And we definitely know that October is our wildfire season, Santa Ana's, and those usually start with sundowners here in Santa Barbara County. So definitely a threat for wildfires until we get into some more beneficial rains. In the past, November's had a little bit of an increase in precipitation above normal, but typically the bulk of our rain is going to hold off until our wet months, which is basically January, February, into March. And some of the things I wanted to bring up, we want to look back at our history and some of the bigger storms with El Nino. The normal winter, we might see 5 storms. During El Nino, the numbers, especially the strong El Ninos, we've seen about 10 to 13 storms. And that's the storms we get at least an inch of rain. So storms capable of multiple impacts is what we're going to be concerned about. That's more like a high wind, high mountain snow, and flooding. When the storms come out of the southwest, we do get a lot of coastal erosion, some bigger waves, especially here in Santa Barbara. So that's something that happened back in 97, 98. Where we start to see the flood problems is when we get saturation of the soil. 10, 12 inches of rain over a long stretch, and then we get several storms in a row. If we can't dry out between storms, it's the second, third storm that's going to bring us most of our problems. And those are the ones that we have to be prepared for. Debris flows happen every time we get a recent burn scar, and that's more related to intensity. That happens every year. Intense downpours can happen at any time, not just during El Nino. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I don't think that's anything else on my list. Do you guys have any other questions about El Nino?
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. Appreciate your information. I think there are questions from lots of council members. Councilmember Rouse?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering now, are the going back to about the 5th slide where you show the Pacific and all the different color temperature gradients, are the does the Japanese current, does the current flow change during an El Nino year? Is it the same strength and magnitude, or is it different, or is the pattern different as far as how the water circulates in the northern hemisphere?
Water currents are not going to change. It's going to be the atmospheric currents in the atmosphere itself, because during El Nino, basically you set up more of a low pressure system over the eastern Pacific instead of high. And that's going to drive our jet stream more to the south, tap into that warmer energy across the tropics. And everybody's heard of Pineapple Express.
That's what I was going to ask you that, yeah.
That's the water vapor content that's down in the tropics that gets energized by the jet stream, and we get a train of storms coming up from our southwest. That would be the scenario we're talking about. If those storms can space themselves out, we don't have a problem. If they get so close we can't dry out in time, that's when we start to see our runoff and our flooding.
Now, it seems to me, just anecdotally, that our channel water is as warm as certainly I ever remember it being. Are we in a position where, if there is a pressure system, very low pressure system off the west coast, that we could actually have a tropical storm event this far up with as much warm water as we have?
That's a great point. Back in 1939, there was a landfalling tropical storm in Long Beach. All the indications was during an El Nino fall in the September timeframe. That's why my office exists. The next year, our office was installed in 1940 because of a tropical storm. So a hurricane needs about 78-degree water temperature to survive and thrive. Right now, it's about 73 to 75, depending on where you are between Santa Monica and here. So we're not that far away from sustaining a hurricane in our waters. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. And our office, we practice with the National Hurricane Center every year to make sure we're prepared.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hotchkiss.
Bring me up to speed. When we say tropical storm, what does that mean? Is that sort of one step down from a hurricane?
That is a strength, yes, one step down from a Category 1 hurricane. So it is a wind-related strength, yeah.
Okay. Second question. This prediction goes forward to just 2016, or are we looking at conditions beyond that?
Well, El Nino is a wintertime impact. So after this winter, and then you saw the projections where it kind of tapers off, there's never been two, since 1950, back-to-back strong El Ninos. In fact, most of the time following a strong El Nino, we go back to a dry pattern.
So it's an annual function. Okay, thank you very much.
I had the question about you have these two different forces, the Pineapple Express bringing water to us, and then the blob that creates a high-pressure system that kind of keeps things away. So how do you think those are going to resolve themselves?
Yeah, the scientific term, the blob, is basically there because high pressure has been blocking storms and warming the ocean. And that's starting to trend cooler. And the idea is that that's going to not be an influence for our weather. But the high pressure is gone, the warming's still there, which for meteorologists, that's fuel for the fire. It's going to help energize our atmosphere even that much more. It's not going to be a negative thing for us. And overall, the steering of the jet stream to our south and the El Nino driving our storm track seems to be the main factor.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Broltz? Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think that one of the things that I find really fascinating and kind of encouraging is the amount of predictive information that's out there that we didn't have before. And just the technology that we have that we can share with other agencies that before it was just, you kind of waited till things got worse, and it isn't the type of quality and predictive services that the National Weather Service provides to us now on a very frequent basis. It's interesting because we have a conference call tomorrow with Eric's office regarding wildfire for this weekend because of the expected high temperatures and winds expected. So we're in constant contact with the Oxnard office, and it's a very good thing for us. Well, what El Nino winters? These are we're going to go through a few of the experiences that we've had. Certainly, these are ones that were very influential in how we responded as a city and what we learned from recent El Ninos, and a lot of people that are in this room today were part of the teams that responded to that. And we're going to go, what we've learned in these storms is kind of our roadmap for how we're going to plan for this year. Here's Laguna Channel as an example of, if we go back to that last slide, Rebecca. The picture on the top is Bath and Ortega Street in 1995. And then the bottom is Laguna Channel, I believe also in 95. This is Laguna Channel. I think this is 2005. I think 2005. Certainly after 2000 because of the presence of the carousel there. But so that's running it at the max level that it can. Next. So we will have wet winters that are not El Nino influenced. So in 2004, 2005, not in El Nino, we still had significant rains. And so this flood cycle that we have one of the things about it, it is a predictable phenomenon. It's not something that we're going to not ever have to deal with. And if you look at it, it's usually once or twice a decade that we have them, whether they're El Nino or not, or just a heavy rainfall. We're going to be dealing with floods, and it's just a fact with the beautiful mountains we have right next to a fairly narrow shelf of land. Our watershed is going to cause us problems just because of the geographical features. So one of the things that we've learned is how important preparation is for us as a city. One of the things about flooding is that it's unlike a fire or an earthquake. With the valuable information we can get from the National Weather Service, we can start planning well before an event occurs, and that's what this team behind you and the other departments have started to do over the past few months, and when we're moving forward now. The preparation is important, but I think cooperation is absolutely essential for us. Flooding will be likely with heavy rainfall in Santa Barbara, so we're anticipating that that's going to occur. If it doesn't, all the better, but that's the stance that we're taking as a city. And we've had very good cooperation and planning with Public Works, with the Harbor Department, with the airport, fire, and police. In the aftermath of the T and Hezazita fires, we developed a flood watershed response plan. Those rains didn't come to fruition, and so that plan is still operational and still very good. And that was conceived with county flood control, public safety agencies for the city of Santa Barbara, Parks and Recreation, Public Works Department, the Red Cross, and so that we started to build this team after the last fires, and we haven't really had to put this plan into effect, and so that's what we will be activating this year. What to expect? Well, history tells us that we're going to have impassable roads, and we have those neighborhoods identified historically where we've had problems. Power loss will be likely. We've been experiencing that on a regular basis as a city anyway, but this will be storm related power loss. We will have high wind and waves. The impact of the tidal high tides with these storms is also a very big impact on how we will what we will be facing and what type of situations we will come across. So that's something we'll be monitoring along with the weather predictions. One thing that we really want to talk to people about, and we will be starting this process soon, is how dangerous floodwater is. It's dangerous from a physical standpoint. It's 6 inches of flow. You can get knocked off your feet. At 2 feet, it will move a vehicle. And so, the debris that's in the floodwater is extremely dangerous, as well as the contamination in the water. All of our crews that were out in the floodwaters, I'm sure it was true of Public Works and Harbor as well, that were dealing with floodwater, you end up with these these really interesting rashes, and so it's not something to play around with. You see people, we don't have the photographs here, but in the underpasses and the freeway when it backed up, you'd see people jumping off into that water. It's really not recommended. It's dangerous from a number of different aspects. So it's something we really want to make the public aware of. Another problem that we've historically had is flooding at the airport, and we're working with the county flood control and the National Fisheries about when we will be able to smooth out the berms around the slough to release the water from the airport. One of the problems we have before the airport actually floods is when they get standing water in the airport, you start getting a lot of birds, large birds, that are attracted to the fresh water. So that increases the chance of bird strikes on aircraft that are working in Santa Barbara. So that's a critical problem that we're looking at as well. And one of the other things that's happened is because of where we are, oftentimes in significant storms, we get isolated. We get a rock slide on 101. We get a rock slide on 154. Something on 101 between here and Ventura. And so keeping our airport and harbor open are really critical for us as a community. Another thing that we will deal with is evacuations, and that's part of our watershed plan. It's also a plan that the police have worked on with the sheriff as well in terms of how do we evacuate areas and what sequence do we do. And one of the things that we will be talking to people about is if it's recommended or we're coming around or law enforcement is coming around asking you to leave, it's very important that you take that seriously, because when it's flooding, it's too late, and it's the help will be harder to get to you, and you start getting behind the curve. And so, just like with wildfire, if people are coming around talking to you about evacuation, it's time to take it very seriously. Next. And for this part, I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks. I just want to talk a little bit about our experience and where we know to expect flooding when we have very high amounts of rainfall. And unfortunately, we are unable to convey all of the rain that we get under very wet winters through our existing drainage systems, most importantly our creeks. So we know that our lower watersheds, particularly Mission Creek and Sycamore Creek, are most at risk of flooding from creek overtopping. We can get clogged storm drains. We have gone out and cleaned our storm drains, and we'll continue to clean storm drains ahead of the storm. However, they can become clogged during the storm, causing flooding elsewhere. The bird refuge and can fill and flood Cabrillo Boulevard, and also Laguna Channel is also subject to flooding. The chart up here is a chart that shows Sycamore Creek, and the red areas are the areas that have the least flood capacity, the least water flow capacity. We've done a number of projects over the years to increase the flood conveyance capacity on the creek, but as you can see, several pinch points still remain. Other issues associated with our waterways during heavy flows include creek bank erosion, where tree failure, and particularly after this severe drought, trees are weakened and not in good condition, and they can fail because of shallow root systems. Also, they're weakened, and the heavy water in the trees can cause branch breakage, which can create debris that flows into our streams, which can hang up on either the banks or on our bridge abutments and cause dams, which can cause flooding. We are preparing to be ready to respond to those types of events, but we're aware from past experiences that they're likely to occur. We've been working closely with the county flood control, who has responsibility for maintaining the creekways, and they have accelerated their maintenance on Sycamore Creek out of concern from residents and neighborhoods about the likelihood of a wet winter. They've inspected the debris basins. They're working with us to coordinate on an emergency drill that's being planned. They have contracts in place for specialty equipment, and they have a modified storm modified staffing when they have a storm watch, so that they make sure that they have staff available to respond. And one resource that they maintain that's a great resource is the real-time rainfall. It doesn't help with flood projection, but it's a great when people want to know how much rain has fallen, which can sort of let you know where you are in terms of wetness. There is the Santa Barbara CAA.gov/OneRain, and that has real-time rainfall information on it. It also has reservoir level information if you're interested in that, so it's a great resource. There's been some concerns and questions about the status of our bridge projects.
How does one find that on the net if you want to do that?
Well, the way I do it is I just type in Santa Barbara OneRain, and then it pops
just
up.
Google for that? That's
what I do. But this is the website is santabarbaraca.gov/OneRain.
Thank you.
The bridge projects that are currently in construction, the contract requires that the flow in the creek be at least equal to the pre-construction flows by the beginning of November. So we, even in design before El Nino had raised its head, we had planned for being able to have stream flow. And so that little neck that you see at the bottom of Cabrillo Boulevard will be widened by beginning of November, and it will still be narrower than it will end up, but it will be equal to what was there before. And that, I'd like to turn it back over to Chief McElroy.
One of the things we'll be concerned about, as we are after every storm, is water quality. And we are a very active ocean sport community. So we're going to have people out in the water taking advantage of surf, taking advantage of a number of things. So we will be posting through Parks and Rec beach warnings on water quality should that need arise. And we will be looking at like I said, high surf and tidal patterns during any flooding event. And one of the other things that we want to watch out for, and we want to educate the public is during this type of storm event, the type of debris that you'll find in the water, there's the biologicals, there's all that's a problem, but it's going to be pushing a lot of large debris down out of the creeks and onto the beaches. So it's a dangerous dangerous place to be in the ocean after a flood. I think that we're still going to have people that are going to want to, if there's good surf, you're not going to keep people out of the water. The Harbor Patrol has an excellent response for that, and since the last El Nino, we've started our ocean response team from the fire department as well. So we have made some changes in terms of that. In terms of what Scott and his crew have done down at the waterfront, we'll be interested in securing the dredge equipment. I think our dredge capability is vastly improved since the really significant storms of 1982 and 83. So the ability of the dredge to keep operating, keep functioning during an active El Nino year is improved dramatically. I know that they're having public meetings down there with the Harbor Commission, and they're going to be alerting the community down there of all anchorage and mooring vessels. And also they'll be securing heavy vessels. There'll be protection of the shoreline, and they're going to utilize their debris cleanup plan. So that the Harbor Department has been working diligently on this. In terms of the whole city, we're building on, like it says here, we're building on past experiences. We know that this isn't going to be a fire problem. This isn't going to be a police problem. It isn't going to be a public works problem. It's going to be a problem for all of us. And so that's why we're taking this cooperative approach and looking and meeting with each other, doing drills, because we want to see what each other's capabilities are. I want to have the right phone number. I want to have the right access to the right equipment and actually know what that equipment's capable of. And so we're sharing our resources, we're sharing the information we have, and like I said, it extends beyond the city to county flood controls, instrumental, from the fire agencies, the area operational plan for all of Santa Barbara County fire agencies has a component that deals with bad weather. So we're working as a city, but also as a larger community to cooperate with each other as if we hit a critical flooding area. We're evaluating the risk. We're looking at our resources. We have contracts in place for emergency response. And we're going to be conducting an exercise October 14th, and that's going to involve interagency cooperation, which we know will be critical. Yes.
Chief, if I could, you said contracting for emergency services. Could you elaborate on that? Or Rebecca, maybe you wanted to do that.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Hotchkiss, we're putting contracts in place ahead of the wet weather season to make sure that equipment we might not have, such as boom trucks or things that we need to get large trees or debris out of the creeks, will be available and ready to be deployed.
So we actually can, although I assume, clear all the channels as much as possible in advance. Still, as you point out, there can be bank failure, et cetera. But we still can act then? It's not perilous to do that?
We would not put people in peril, but if we have the right equipment staged ahead of time, it improves our ability to act. It doesn't guarantee it, obviously, but it certainly adds the ability to be responsive and get debris out of creeks, particularly if it hangs up on bridges and things.
Yeah, this would be important. Thank you.
Another thing that we learned through our past experiences is we have a responsibility to conduct a community outreach. And one area I think that we hadn't been as successful in the past is outreach to the Spanish-speaking community. And Liliana and Yoli are going to be very instrumental in that, and they've been out in the community already working with the Spanish-speaking community, and so we're very hopeful that we're going to have certainly a more robust effort in that area as we move into this season. The message that we want to get out there is the community needs to be prepared. We always need to be prepared, and we talk about earthquake planning, we talk about fire planning, we talk about all this preparedness all the time. This is really a chance, and this is one of the messages we're going to be driving home for the next few months. If you haven't got your earthquake kit together, if you hadn't had a family plan on what you're going to do, this is a great time to do it, because not only will that be valuable for you in the future, but this is something we can predict is coming, but it's not going to come on you right away, so you have time. And one of the things that we really want to have people realize, it's important to prepare now, because the day it's flooding, you're not going to find a contractor. You're not going to find somebody that's going to come out and help you, because they're all going to be busy. They're all going to be working. So you can improve your chances by getting your property ready now. If you've lived here a long time, you know where your property or your home is vulnerable, and now's the time to do something about it. To that end, we're going to have sandbag stations open on October 17th, Saturday, and that's going to be both at the Corporation Yard on Yananali and City Fire Station 7 up on Stanwood Drive. And so we'll have people there assisting to help you fill sandbags. Yoli and Liliana will have some tables set up there with some information on how to prepare yourself for a possible El Nino. But we really want to not be having situations like this, which was also downtown Santa Barbara, where we're out, walking through the streets trying to take people out. We will, of course, do that, but the more prepared we can be for people, and the more the community is prepared, we're less likely to engage in multiple dangerous evacuations. So we want to get the information out there as soon as possible. We will be utilizing the National Weather Service throughout this period. Eric and his office are extraordinarily responsive. So any alerts that we get, we will be passing on to the community, and we want to keep everybody as informed as possible. It's really important, as part of any emergency plan, if you have it's particularly medical conditions that require ongoing medications, that you have stockpiles ahead of time, and of course food and water. These are good preparations always, but right now we've got time to plan for a potential season where it might become very necessary. We're really not trying to crank the fear factor up now, but we are trying to say it's a great time to look at your preparation for any number of disaster situations. And stay away from creeks. When something like this is going on, the new thing that Yoli's got, if it pours, stay indoors. And if you just look at the last couple storms in Los Angeles, they had, they were already having creek rescues early in the season. What's happening in South Carolina is really indicative of the type of problems that floodwaters cause. So there's cautionary tales out there, and staying out of our creeks are beautiful, but it's not a great place to be playing around in during a storm. Not only for the speed of the water, but the stability of the banks where you're standing it's going to be impacted. And if to reinforce this point again, if you're asked to evacuate, don't wait. I mean, we're coming around because we think it's very important. We've looked at where we think that we will have problems. So that's a function that's done by law enforcement primarily. So if the police or sheriff are at your door asking you to leave, or driving to the street using a loudspeaker asking you to leave, it's something to take extremely seriously. And that concludes our presentation. Everybody here is available for questions.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of important information. Councilmember Rouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you mentioned the Sandbag Day on the 17th of October, and it seems to me that, which is great, it's the two locations. You mentioned them verbally. It'd be good to get them posted. I'm sure they'll be on your website. It seems to me like in other storm events, we've also had other stations open during those events as well, because obviously October 17th is great, but people are going to start thinking about it after it starts raining more. Are those same locations going to remain open, or are there going to be other spot locations as we get into events?
Mayor Pro Tem Hart and Councilmember Rouse. We will have sandbags, as we always do, available during storm events. And in the last big one we had it both at the Corporation Yard and at Fire Station 7. I don't recall the city having other locations.
No, those are the two locations, and generally just at the Corporation Yard.
They're private. I know Home Improvement Center, a number of other people have had sandbags available before, but we will of course have them open during any event. But as part of the message that we're trying to send about being prepared, we're giving people a chance to not wait till they're driving through 6 inches of water to go down to the yard on Yananali Street. If you can have them stockpiled or placed, if you've got a problem, here's a chance to do it ahead of time.
Right.
I'd like to just clarify that we typically only have them available when the National Weather Service has issued a flood watch. So if you want to prepare, they're available at commercial places. We're having a special opening this month to give you an extra opportunity to prepare. But we really encourage you to get them sooner rather than later if you know that your property is one where you're going to need it.
Okay, very good. And then, Ms. Bjork, I had a couple of points from Public Works. The chief brought up the thing about the Edison issues and power outages and whatnot. I know that during our discussions we've been going on with Edison about, they actually had extra personnel on location. I think it was during the film festival events and other times when there may have been weather/public events going on. I was wondering if we could maybe have a conversation along those lines again in terms of I'm sure they're going to be busy when the weather hits, but it sure seems like it'd be nice if we didn't have to wait for the second person to get into the vault every time the power went down.
Mayor Pro Tem Hart and Councilmember Rouse, we will have that conversation. We have already had that conversation with them. It is their practice when there's a flood or bad weather projection to have extra people on staff, but we will continue to have that conversation with them in terms of the readiness. I do want to say along that line that most of our critical facilities in the city do have backup generation, so our critical facilities will continue to have power, but working closely with Edison to make sure power is available to the public is important as well.
And then the last point was we talked briefly. You mentioned trees briefly, and I know there's been a lot of discussion from different neighbors and anecdotally about trees. And I know, particularly along as I drove in response to a call on the Wilcox property and those houses over there in that area where there's very, very, very tall eucalyptus trees, and all these trees have been stressed because of the drought. And I know from our days out at UCSB every winter you hear the chainsaws going all during the El Nino years because so many of those large branches would come down, crushing cars, causing a lot of property damage. What what can we do or what can be done from a public works standpoint proactively to assess and to perhaps maybe take care of some of those situations before? I mean, it was pretty intimidating looking up at the wall of those trees as I drove along that area near the Wilcox the other day, and I thought, well, if I lived in one of those houses, I probably would have these same concerns.
I'm going to ask Jill Zachary, the acting public works director, Parks and Recreation director, to answer.
Mayor Pro Tem Hart and Councilmember Rouse, those trees, and I'll address those specific trees and then trees in general. Those eucalyptus trees, we actually did go out and re-inspect them a couple of weeks ago. They were pruned January of last year. They are in a state where they are stressed because of the drought, but any more pruning could further affect the trees. We have been evaluating eucalyptus trees in general. In fact, we're looking at some down on Lower Sycamore Creek right now and trying to determine what additional trimming we might do in advance of wet weather, particularly adjacent to creeks, and then also larger trees where we might have a concern. Our staff are fairly well versed in where the problem areas are, and in the last couple of years, believe it or not, even though there has been a drought, we've been concerned about there being tall, almost dead or dead trees, and actually been proactive in trying to address them in advance, partly because of them either being a fire hazard, but then also ultimately the concern over what would happen once it did start to rain or if we had high winds.
Councilmember Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Bjork, just curious, is there any kind of instrumentation that gives us water level in the creeks?
There are some stream gauges, and I'm afraid I don't have the details on where they are, but there are some stream gauges that County Flood Control does keep an eye on in terms of the level in the creeks. I think that the issue really is that our front country watershed is so, what I would say, flashy. When it rains hard, the levels can rise very fast. So even though we may have that information, it doesn't give you a lot of warning.
Thank you.
I had a couple questions. Following up on Councilmember Rouse's question about Edison and coordination with them. At the last time they were here, we talked about the transmission lines and the towers that are kind of the critical linchpin. Have they gotten back to you with additional information about the status of those since that discussion?
There hasn't been additional information about the status in that there's no additional information regarding an alternate supply, and actually we haven't had a response back from them yet. We have sent a follow-up letter asking for the information.
Okay, good. Thank you. And then in terms of Santa Barbara County Flood Control, I know they're doing extra work. Do you feel confident that they have the resources to do what needs to be done before the storms arrive, or is it like everything, they're going to do the best they can with the limited resources?
They have a long-term plan, preventive maintenance plan, and they implement it over many years. And so, for instance, Sycamore Creek, which was not scheduled for the maintenance, was moved up to this year ahead of time. So I really think that they've got their preventive maintenance well in hand. As Chief McElroy was saying, there's a lot we can do ahead, but there's some stuff that we just know that we're going to have to respond to, and very, very heavy rainfall is that you will not stay within the creeks. We just don't have the capacity for a lot of water within the creek banks.
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Mayor, to follow up on Councilmember Francisco's question, the One Rain website also has some stream gauge information on there as well. They've got a stream gauge on Mission Creek within the city that gives you a sense.
And Chief, you mentioned that there is effort to get a permit in advance so that the airport flooding situation might be alleviated by doing some berm removal at the Goleta Beach, I guess. Is that lining up properly, or is that just in process now, beginning that effort?
Mayor Pro Tem Hart, the airport director and her staff have been in contact with County Flood Control, and I'm also in contact with the county as well. So we're trying to do what we can with that. And I also wanted to make mention of the fact that County Flood Control was going to be here today, but they are doing a similar presentation for Goleta City Council right now. So they were invited, and we're going to be here. So we are working closely with them.
Mayor Pro Tem Hart, Andrew Bermond at the airport. Just to add a little bit to that, we've been working for about 2 years on a long-term program for management of the Goleta Slough mouth. There are some environmental concerns because of endangered species in the Goleta Slough. We do not anticipate that that permit will be issued this year. Our hope is that in the case of an emergency, we can rely on our application for a long-term permit as a baseline for discussion of an emergency permit.
So the hope is that enough work has been done in advance, not necessarily get the permit in advance, but to have a cooperative relationship and do what you need to do when it occurs, if it does.
Yes, that's correct. In order to minimize the environmental impact to endangered species.
Understanding the trade-offs and everything. It's a challenge. Okay. You mentioned, Ms. Bjork, too, about construction at Cabrillo and the active construction site. Understand that it will be widened to full capacity, but does the physical improvements that are in place, are those really going to be adequate in a significant storm event? I mean, there's probably nothing that can be done at this point, but I can't imagine that what's out there is designed to be in place and stay in place in a major storm event.
Mayor Pro Tem Hart, yes, I think it will be adequate. What will remain in place is basically the bulkheads that are along the edge of the creek, and I think that they will be adequate.
Is concrete, or is that just plywood?
No, it's not plywood. It's metal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pounded into the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if in the event that it doesn't work, is that the contractor's responsibility to put everything back?
Oh, gosh, I hope we don't have to ask that question. But yes, that would be the contractors, I believe. But we'd have to really deal with that issue when it arises.
It might be worth having a conversation in advance about who's going to be responsible, because, separate from our physical infrastructure and the value of that, just having that work destroyed and the time it would take to rebuild that is a significant impact in that community. So, and then finally, do you have any plans? Are there anything in the budget to accommodate the street repairs that are going to be necessary if there's a big event that causes a big impact on streets? And is there any extra funding? And in the past, has that just been taking money from past or future road repair budgets to do emergency repairs?
Yeah, as you're well aware, the streets budget is very, very lean. We do not have extra money budgeted for repairs. We would need to take money from reserves to do those repairs. So we would have to respond in that same manner. It would affect future year allocations.
Okay. And has that historically been the response, is using reserves?
I'm not entirely sure. I expect that in the flood emergencies that we may have submitted for some cost recovery for that kind of response. Our streets funding hasn't been as badly impacted historically as it is currently.
Okay.
As you know, the funding for that infrastructure has not kept up with the cost of maintenance of that infrastructure.
Thank you. We have two speaker slips, Phil Walker and Bonnie Raisin.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Hart, members of the City Council. A bit of historical perspective. I've been at work at El Estero through a lot of El Nino events since December 1981. And thinking back, I actually was involved in losing control of El Estero probably in late February 1983 during the El Nino, which was responsible for demise of the yacht club and all the bike paths. And that was more an ocean-driven event rather than flooding. And it sure caused me a nightmare. And the supervisor, we called him in, Bill Moorhead. He's now principal engineer for Anaheim Water District. Very talented gentleman. And we had one heck of a time, because actually when I drove to work that evening, I worked a 12-hour night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Waves were breaking across Cabrillo Boulevard, and the amount of sand that intruded into El Estero was just unbelievable, and I dealt with it for probably the next 8 months after that event. As I remember, we lost our grinding devices in the influent wet well, and it overtopped to look like the Colorado River in there. Lost the grit chamber. We threw out the clutch and the gravity thickener, all due to inorganic sand loading. And then both digesters had to be cleaned out. and it really put a crimp in our style at El Estero. So it can measurably affect the collection system and the wastewater treatment plant. But I think planning's in place today to handle it much better. But I still have my doubts whether we're going to get this El Nino event as far as extreme rains. And the pattern I saw on Sunday with the jet stream coming down from the Gulf of Alaska and making the stream swing, and the rain distribution in the upper San Ynez drainage looks sort of like the last 4 years, so we'll see. But if I see Marlin being pulled out of the channel, you know, we get that 82, 84 degree water. Yeah, it's a coming, but Bill Patzert, Dr. William Patzert of the JPL lab, has been conspicuously very quiet. So when he says it's going to happen, it'll happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Ms. Raisin?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Hart and council members. I'm glad I came today, and I'm very relieved to hear about the maintenance of the creeks. I was selling real estate when a federal judge drowned in Sycamore Creek in 91, 92, or I think 92. And it was horrific. And due to clogging, which, as I understand it, can happen regardless of how careful our maintenance crews are. But now, and the last thing I want to say is my concern for the infrastructure. And it's sad for me to hear that any funding that might have been available has not come through. So I guess my next question, and I don't know if you can answer this, so with horrific disrepair of our streets and our sidewalks, you know, what is this city council prepared to do in an emergency like that to repair? I mean, you will find the money somewhere, I hope. Well, and then the other thing I want to say, except complimenting the presenters today, is that I'm assuming that the gutters and the storm drains are clear. As you know, infrastructure is a big item on my wish list, and it's certainly heightened by what could be a major storm. So some response at some level to my question about our infrastructure and the damage that it might suffer, and then what will be done afterwards to make traffic mobile and pedestrians and bicycles. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reason. Any other questions from council? Councilmember Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where are our evacuation centers, should they be needed?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hodgkins. They are, with the American Red Cross, they have designated shelters. However, they're not opened until we know exactly what it is that we're doing in regards to evacuation, where we're evacuating residents and citizens. What we don't want to do is end up evacuating residents into another watershed area. So in our tabletop exercise that we're having on the 14th, the American Red Cross will be there and will actually identify areas that we can go that are considered shelter center sites. So that way we can pick people up and take them to shelters, wherever that might be. So the Red Cross really doesn't advertise where those shelters are, because what we don't want to do is have citizens go to a shelter that might be on a list that's not opened, or a shelter that's on the list that might be hazardous. So that's why we don't actually list the shelters. But there is a list with the Red Cross, and if the shelter needs to be opened, they will be opened.
Okay, that all sounds good, but if the power goes out, how does one learn where to go?
There's always a radio. There is within the county of Santa Barbara.
You got batteries, yes.
Yes, and a car. I mean, if you have a vehicle, you can actually go out to your car and turn it on.
That's good.
If you have a wind-up radio, battery-operated radio, we'll try to get the information out as quickly as possible. I know that the radio stations, the county has what's called the Radio Ready program, And there are radio stations in Santa Barbara that actually have satellite phones, and we can connect to them if we need to. And if push comes to shove, then we will ask for volunteers. We did during 97 and 98. We had volunteers go door to door and actually tell people that there was a storm coming. And we'll do that again if we need to.
You mentioned a radio station. What is the radio station?
It's called the Radio Ready program. It's a program that's run by the County Office of Emergency Management. And there are several radio stations within the county that have an agreement with the county. They have satellite phones, so that way the county can call can call them if the power's out. They have no phone. At least they have a satellite phone that they can connect.
So
with.
if I think I have to be evacuated and want to find out where I should go via the radio, what station do I tune into? Do you know?
There's actually a list. I don't have them off the top of my head, but there is a list on their site, and we can make that available. There's also within your packet, there's some safety tips that we have also about what the differences are between a warning and a watch, and where you can go to get sandbags, and also some tips on in case before, during, after. Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hart and
Chief.
Council Member Hotchkiss, another thing that to keep in mind is when we are conducting evacuations, those people will be in radio contact with the command center, and so they'll be aware of where they're going to be accepting people who are evacuated. One of the things we've noticed in Santa Barbara is, when we think back to the Hezazita fire, I think we evacuated 30,000 people. How much this community absorbs into their homes, members of the community. So a lot of people do go to shelters, but a tremendous amount of people go to other folks' homes. And another thing, while I've got Yoli up here, that I really want to plug is the work that she's done with their CERT program and Liliana with Listos. We have a educated, trained volunteer corps that has been really helpful to this community, and I think we'll be seeing the effect of that should we have any situations come up. They were unusually active and effective during the oil spill that we had this year, and they were commended for it. And a lot of those people were trained here by Yoli.
Thank you for that work. You also push out 911 reverse 911 calls to residents on their landlines in geographic areas when there's evacuations, and folks can register their cell phones too, with the department to get those kind of notifications too, can't they?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, they can go onto the sheriff's website and register not just their home phone, but their cell phone and their email address.
Okay, great.
The one thing I do want to caution, though, is if you have a phone that's not a regular plug-in phone, it's just a wireless phone. If the
power goes off, you're vulnerable.
So yeah. Also, knowing when you dial 911 from your cell phone where it actually goes, it might be a good time right now to test that out.
Okay.
And so.
Well, definitely the theme today is be prepared. And when these storms, if they come, Mr. Bolts feels pretty comfortable we're probably going to have some rain. And so if they come, we just need to do the best we can to deal with the circumstances. And it does overwhelm the system, as Ms. Bjork said. There isn't the capacity to clear every creek of all the water that comes down if it comes down fast. So folks have to be prepared, and they have to be vigilant, and they have to take steps in advance so that they're not finding themselves in a dangerous situation.
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to just say one thing. I'd like to introduce Liliana Encinas.
Yes.
She's been working a lot with our Hispanic population, and I'd like to just have her address very, very quickly what she's been doing in the with the Hispanic population.
Thank you, Ms. McGlinchey.
Good afternoon. My name is Liliana Encinas, and I'm the Public Education Specialist for Santa Barbara City Fire Department. Mayor Pro Tem, I would just like to express the importance of that public outreach. I've been working with the Hispanic community. I'm Hispanic myself and raised in Mexico City, so in Mexico and Juarez, and so I can relate to our community because of the preparedness message. We come from a culture where preparedness is not part of it. And so bringing that emergency preparedness has been a challenge. But I think where we are now, as the chief mentioned, we have a cadre of trainers, about 60 trainers in South County that are Spanish speakers and bring this preparedness message to our communities. And so if we have evacuation warnings or if we talk about earthquake preparedness or flood preparedness, they are willing to come out door to door or whatever it takes to get our community prepared. And so I just wanted to let you know that those efforts are going on.
Thank you. That's very helpful and reassuring. So, any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. Council member and committee assignment reports. Okay, well then I think we'll adjourn to closed session, or actually, Councilmember White.
Sorry, going through my papers here. The Sustainability Committee, I don't think I reported on that. That was on September 24th, so a bit ago. Met and reviewed the 16 projects that have been completed on our sustainability list, as well as our 25 that are in process. I won't go over them one by one, but it is just a wide range from water and energy conservation, for example, trash and recycling, and transportation projects, all which are lowering our footprint in the community.
Councilmember Hotchkiss.
Thank you, sir. Well, I wanted to compliment you on the opening of the new observatory, old, now refurbished observatory at the Natural History Museum. You were succinct, to the point, and without notes.
Thank you.
Unlike, I think, all the other people that were doing comments that went on forever. You represented the city very well. Thank you very much.
Very much. Councilmember Murillo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. So I'd like to congratulate the Santa Barbara Youth Council for a candidates forum last night. Very tough questions, and also participating was Future Leaders of America and the Coalition of Youth Advocates, COYA, and they're focused on tobacco use prevention. A very good event.
Thank you. If there aren't any more reports, then we'll adjourn to closed session and don't anticipate that there's a report that will be issued. Thank you.
Felt this way.